Well, there's a couple different things. I think the first thing is that we hold ourselves back from is we have a lot of fears. And fears, when you really start to dive into them, like you mentioned in the beginning of this, like I started talking with you about like the East and you started, I remember you told me in 2017, like you should read the Bhagavad Gita. So I literally wrote it, I got it like the next week and read it while we were traveling. And so there was that. And as I was writing the book, I was like, what's the thing? Because the original title of the book was The Psychology of Taking Action. Because I was looking at the Mindset Mentor podcast. I have 1,400 episodes and I was like, it's just me speaking for almost every single one of them. And I was like, what do I teach? Like, what do people want from me? And I was like, it's almost all like tips and tricks to understand yourself to take action. Because everybody who's listening to a podcast has the awareness of, I want to improve, I want to get better, I want something different, but how do I do it? And so I started saying, okay, if taking action is what the book's going to be about, like, why don't people take action in the first place? And one of the things that pops up for people is fear. Like there's some sort of fear that pops up for them. And I had a conversation with one of my friends who went and lived in the tribe with a tribe, a native Brazilian tribe in the middle of Brazil. And so he had to fly into a town, he had to hop on a boat and go for 2 days on a boat in the middle of nowhere. And he started talking to me about these things that he called primal fears and intellectual fears. So like a primal fear is pain or death is attached to it. And we don't really come up with too many primal fears in our life nowadays. Intellectual fear is like what we deal with all day long, which is, you know, the fear of rejection, the fear of failure, the fear of not being accepted, the fear of success. We all have these fears, and all of these fears are made up in our minds. And so I was listening to, I'm pretty sure it was Sadhguru I was listening to. And I was like, I put on, and I was driving around in Sedona as I was writing the book. I was there just to try to get my whole mind together. I was by myself writing it. And I was like looking at fears and trying to figure them out. And one thing that he said that like really hit me more than anything else is, okay, I've identified my fears. And the next thing is, well, how do I overcome these fears? And if it's an intellectual fear, the fears that exist in our minds is you can't overcome something that doesn't exist. And so we basically wake up in the morning, we create the boogeyman, which is like the fear of success, the fear of failure, whatever it is. And instead of actually taking the action that we need to and focusing on what it is that we want, we take all of our focus and put it towards trying to overcome this fear, when in reality, the fear doesn't even exist in the first place. And so I think the biggest thing for most people is like the fear is keeping you from focusing. But there's also like the identity of who you think you are. And one of my favorite things is challenging who I think I am all the time. Like I love the story, and I put in the book, of Jim Carrey when he decided to be in Man on the Moon. And the Man on the Moon was a movie where he ended up playing Andy Kaufman. And there was a whole documentary that was done on this, and they curbed it for like 20 years because it was so off the rails of how crazy he went. And what he did was it's a documentary called Jim and Andy that's on him playing the role on Man on the Moon. So Andy Kaufman was a guy who was once alive. And the crazy part about Andy Kaufman is he also played other characters. So it was Jim Carrey playing Andy Kaufman, who played like Tony Clifton and other characters. But the thing that happened with him was that he would never break character. So he was a method actor. So for 4 months, he played as this real life person. And even to the point where his driver that would pick him up in Hollywood and drive him to his house said that whoever he was playing, at the time that they stopped recording, whether it was Andy Kaufman, Tony Clifton, he would play that person the entire day when he was driving him home that night, and he'd pick him up and he was still the same person, not Jim Carrey anymore. And so what happened was he ended up like, and it gets kind of crazy, where he ends up doing therapy sessions with Andy Kaufman's real daughter and his family to like help them overcome his sudden death. And so what happens is they stopped recording 4 months later, and he's like, I don't know who I am. And he lost who he was. And he's like, I don't know my beliefs. I don't know what makes me happy, what makes me sad, what pisses me off anymore. He's like, I've kind of just lost who Jim Carrey is. And that's kind of like his spiritual awakening that you've seen him go through over the past 20 years. And he realized, if I can lose Jim Carrey, then who the hell is Jim Carrey? And he realized that Jim Carrey is just basically a character that he's playing all the time that is completely somebody else, and he could just wake up another morning and act like he's somebody else. And so I think that two of the things that really keep us from focusing on stuff is we get really afraid and fearful of making change or judgment or failure and all that. And the other thing is like who we actually truly think we are. will hold us back from taking either the action that we need to, or staying in the exact same position that we're in. Gita gives an example of a lion attacking you or a tiger attacking you at night. And one of the examples I give in the book is similar to that, where it's like, if you think about it, we've all had this, we have a really intense dream. Like you're walking in a forest, whatever it is, and you see a lion, it starts running after you. You run from it, you turn, you look over your shoulder, it's getting closer, you're still running from it, you turn, you look over your shoulder, just as teeth are about to dig into you. And you wake up in the middle of the night and your body didn't move at all, but you're sweating, you're out of breath, your heart rate is intensely going. And the amazing thing about being a human, they usually say in any cases, what your biggest strength is also can be your biggest fault. The thing about humans is that we can project our minds into a future that doesn't exist yet. And so what we can do right now is we can sit here, we're in the studio, everything is amazing. We have food, water, shelter, clothing, everything. But if I'm like, as a lot of people do, like if I'm starting a business, right? I can sit here and I can think, well, I really want to start this business. But then I start playing out all of the things that could go wrong, which is what we tend to do. Not what goes right, but what could go wrong. When I project my mind into that future, the crazy part is that my mind and my body are constantly connected. So my brain is sending neuropeptides to my body and creating hormones as if that moment is actually happening right now. And so what happens is we tend to, as humans, as a protection mechanism, we tend to project ourselves into a future that is fearful, that is scary, and that fearful, scary feeling usually keeps us in the exact same place. And so what I always say is like, if I'm going to imagine the worst that could happen, why don't I at least try to see the best that could happen? And so if I'm going to notice myself, the awareness of like, I'm really in a lot of fear right now with starting this business. And I'm going, man, what's the worst that could happen? Well, then I might as well close my eyes and say like, what's the best that could happen? And what would it feel like to start this business and to be able to crack $1 million in a business? And how proud of myself would I be to break $1 million in sales and to be able to build this and travel with my family and provide what I've always wanted to provide. And if I'm going to feel the feelings of fear, why don't I also just try on feeling the feelings of success and getting there? And so if we notice it's an intellectual fear, the first piece that I always say is there's three pieces. There's the awareness of it. Okay, I'm aware that I'm in a state of fear. I need a practice to get myself out of that. Okay, if I notice myself in a state of fear, what's my practice to get myself out of it? Well, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna calm down and take 6 deep breaths, and I'm gonna connect back to my heart, and I'm gonna ask myself, like, what's the best thing that could happen? That's the practice to get myself out of it. And then the last piece is repetition. So it's awareness, it's practice, it's repetition. If I do it over and over and over again, eventually I start to rewire myself. So like one of the things that I found in myself years ago that I didn't like was that I judge people. And I'm like, man, I love people. Like I try to be of service as much as I can, but an immediate thought that will come in my head sometimes is like judgment of somebody that I don't know. And I just judge them. And I was like, I don't like that pattern. I want to change this pattern within myself. It's awareness. I become aware of what I want to change. And the first time I really did it, I was at a grocery store and this guy had this like Bluetooth, like the long Bluetooth. It was like as if he was, making cold calls at an office, but he was at the grocery store. And immediately the first thought in my head was judgment. And I always say you can't change your first thought, but you could change your second thought. So I noticed a judgment as a first thought. Awareness. My practice that I decided for myself was I'm going to force myself in my head to say 3 things that I like about this guy. I paused myself in the moment. I found myself in a pattern that I don't want to be in anymore. What are 3 things that I like about this guy? And I said it, and then I went on about my day. And I started doing this over and over and over and over again. And one thing that I noticed is that my first thought started changing to less judgment and more acceptance. Because ultimately that's what I really want to work on, is more acceptance and loving of people and of myself. And so I think it's becoming aware of it. Once you're aware of the things that the pattern you're trying to change, what's the practice that you're going to take yourself down? And then noticing that you're just going to need to do it over and over and over again. But one of the biggest keys is to give yourself grace as you're doing it. Because a lot of times we become aware and then we judge ourselves and we beat ourselves up for it. So I think it's giving yourself a lot of love and grace and going, hey, I've noticed this pattern. Don't worry, we're going to change it. Let's go on this practice, and just continuing to do that.